Head count. Cross-legged, upright, all night, floating in Santa Ana jail after a routine traffic check turned up an outstanding ticket for overtime parking years before at an anti-war demonstration. Not knowing how well they'd search the bus, impounded for the duration, but knowing what they might find. Rules of the road. Keep moving. Never get popped for 2 at a time. Meditating like crazy all night, trying to keep my mind off that, afraid the energy might guide them. Wondering, while my fellow threats to straight white law and order threw up babbling epics of hardcore, dark-skinned poverty, the stinking racist reality of this squirrely teller's to gauge how many millions of us there are in here. Interindependently of each other. Or if it's just we two, imagining one another in all our possibilities. Or just the one. Ourself in names and verbs and syntax, the lover, as Eckhart says, turning always into what is loved. Multiple personalities, a certain understanding of economic geography, oil, crack, opium, smack, the weapons racket. A room with a view of the house on the hill, the 5-sided figure raised on the fill where the swamp used to be. The temple where the price of money gets set by the priests who traffic in it. The court of last resort, seating men and women of the cloth. The fortified state house, all built by those who live without. Giving opinion and attitude. How many suckered into blaming people instead of the system for their impossible situations, putting their time and energy into the more or less curable symptoms rather than the root causes, forgetting that yesterday's economic scandals, political slapsticks, judicial injustices point to something that lies behind the present tense and can't be dealt with on personal levels. How many trying to kill desire instead of themselves, or love itself. Convinced by the myth of Sisyphus not to slice our wrists quite yet, but go into isolation, like Moses in Mississippi, teaching kids math, or those red diaper babies, romantic hearts with enlightenment heads, incommunicado for good reason. Pride, remorse, confusion, whatever survival instinct demands. Never opening the door without asking first who's there. Never using names on the phone. Never sure which bed is wired. A cold eye in a warm body. How many caught in the bind between biology and mind, asking how we could dare bring children into this war-infested world, nurse them on milk contaminated by products of free enterprise, better killing through chemistry, here in the heartland, where we, who wanted only to live in peace, now fight fire with fire, an eye for an eye, becoming our own worst enemy, making the scorched world blind, afraid, even here, alien nation, land of the brave, to say how we feel, tell it like it is, for fear some night we won't make it home. Or find if we do, instead of mail, a rattlesnake, a letter bomb, a stab, strangle, bullet, or worse, from men we're nothing to but a job. How many blowing their brains out, with cathode tubes glazing their eyes, corporate probes stuck in their ears, jumping like frogs on a galvanized wire to tunes in the register labels prefer. Getting cancer from X-ray exams, chlorine daughters in the water, benzene rings when filling the tank. A little bit here, a little bit there, poisoning the earth and air. Things that food manufacturers put in our mouths, words by their lawyers put in our laws in order to fix our unwritten constitutions, so they and theirs are never proved guilty, if or as charged. How many so beaten down By the State of the Union, they're half willing to believe that any change has got to be for the better, that when you've got nothing, etc., throwing the scumbags out the window will at least let in some fresh air, even if the know-nothings then slip in the front door, half willing to agree with their evil twins that nothing short of starting from scratch will work. So nuke it all. Let Dada sort it out. How many, having learned the hard way that the first freedom is the freedom to be let be, liberty, privacy, the right undergirding all the rest, the right to live in peace and goodwill in an unpolluted world, sharing its necessities respectfully and equitably, the privacy of our intimate bodies, the sanctity of our hearts and minds, uninvaded, unviolated by military, industrial, financial, evangelical complications. How many economic refugees in spiritual retreat, crossing one or another border just under the wire, under the bottom line, with only the sweat and sun on our backs, a bottle of water if we're lucky, on foot in a foreign land, as lovers always are, unfamiliar with the native tongues. How many, with substances circle dancing around a black omnivorous hole, their best metaphor yet, relearning the ancient tantras. You can't know what something means unless you know what it might mean. The goal is nothing, the movement all. Language is never innocent. You can't possess the one you love. How many falling back on feeling, intuition, imagination, sensations compounded with memory, a certain indubitable something to implicate space and time in the hyper-temporal, exponentially spatial machinations of what they think of as their consciousness, finding reason so embedded in the logic behind the carnage it's lost all claim to authority over desire, taking hope in uncertainty, embracing absurdity, expecting paradise in paradox, any chink for a toehold, eating, drinking, making merry, such stopgap measures, the alternative, concluding in a box, oven, or ditch, too depressing to dwell on. How many, a little sideways, looking at things so their edges dissolve into weird somatophores, with no particular rhyme or reason, this identical to that, one identified with one, and not knowing where to stop, drowning in possibilities, heartfelt correspondences, uncanny singularities, physical limits apparently irrelevant or out of order, as if for the time being whatever conjuncture the mind conceives is real, and death mere illusion. How many coming to believe, for want of a better explanation, that fundamental reality is light, mood, understanding, and fear, like the man said, in that order, and authenticity, that old-fashioned shibboleth, as riddled with rhetoric and chatter as any corpse in the heat, with maggots, harder to come by than ever. How many on high, as the Indian said, not just because it feels so good, except of course when it doesn't, but to try from a vantage point of heightened sensitivity, a little further up the scale, to comprehend, if not why, at least who and what we are. How best to live these lives, given all the givens we never asked for, poor, nasty, brutish, short, etc., all the sad mythologies, and that it's all mythology may be the saddest myth of all. How many down on head trips, having lost faith in a freedom found only in ideas, satisfaction only in spurts, unable to separate is from does, what's happening from who we are, unable to locate or presume a unified sensibility, still point, consistent center, or immediacy persisting through time, space, and tribe, unable, like some, to believe we are simply because we think, or think we know anything we didn't already believe in, unable, like some Renaissance men, minds bent into Greek positions, to privilege the rational, the immemorial, the purely imaginary ideal over the singularly idiotic, unimaginable clutter of real-life redundancy. How many liberated far less than expected by the next word in technology, and at the cost of their dreams turned into products, who they believe they were into cheap commodities and services floated on a virtual market. The balance of nature and machine proclaimed in charts and diagrams, a fable made believable by reducing the real world to selected inputs that redefine steady state as the status quo ante. Power to the powers that be. How many on the ocean floor, constructing exoskeletons from chance encounters with debris, caught up in the futility of trying by process of accretion, making, knowing, experiencing, having, in all the biblical senses, to accumulate a self. How many brought to their knees by the complexity of it all, the complicated intricacy, the incessant, insistent interpenetration, and sheer multiplicity, so time makes sense only as a fall from an innocence pure and simple into the present criminal state, redeemable, if at all, only by an act of mercy, a miracle, or pardon granted by the court of last resort. How many pretty much convinced all knowing is merely word games? All languages and vocabularies less tools for navigating the world than self-involved intensities, inoculated against questions of the to what end, to whose benefit, whose detriment, what good is it sort. So trying to make a virtue of that maybe ontological condition by joining in the fun of novel verbal opacities. How many insisting that love, like art and truth, is made, not found. A strategy of the physical as the physical is of desire. The primum mobile, seeking connection one with another, even before an other is known to exist, but unwilling to go through it again, aware the race is to the young, who can better afford the price, sometimes might even get in free, not feeling compelled to ask how it compares or what it will cost over a lifetime, when time is running out and life shorter than ever may not warrant repeating some of those lessons on what the loved one wants the two in love to be in being one. How many allowing themselves to believe in belief, as they believe in love, after all the pratfalls and catastrophes, loving what they believe, believing that and what they love, believing love and belief cognates, believing in themselves enough to allow themselves to love and be loved by others as well as themselves. How many coming to see ourselves less as who we were, what our ancestors did or didn't do, where we come from, how we got here, how we happen to still be there, than what we're going through right now in time-space. No field, no ground, No then, when, ever, or never, no negation. Paternity more genitive than genital, more ethical than visceral. Maternity an obvious fact. Not knowing where to draw the line between the ego, the self, and what in loose talk we call other. Riding an endless rainbow wave, heading unknown, and little luck trying to steer. How many, questioning their least examined beliefs and values once they see what strange bedfellows share their most intimate convictions, maintaining against all odds fraternity and equality, prerequisite to liberty. How many using intelligence as a means, not an end, all life forms aspire to. But a bio-gadget, developed through ages of hit and miss, to persuade one strain of protoplasm to go forth and multiply, a product of infinitesimal odds in a cosmic crapshoot. How many, not otherwise suicidal, anticipating with some pleasure a quantum leap, a paradigm shift, forever changing everything, physical, biological, psychic, social, transcendental, all the elements necessary reaching critical density, all identities deleted in simultaneous combustion, consciousness obliterated in the natural order of things. How many up against the precept that whether we call the subject in question animus or anima, life force or vital matter, a spark, breath, or emanation, will, desire, forethought, reason, what they used to call intellect, ego, id, instinct, libido, shadow, archetype, cultural constructioning, molecular interactions, energetic oscillations, form, feeling, impulse, consciousness, perception. There is no difference between here and there. Whoever thinks there is a difference goes from death to death. How many testifying, one hand up, one down to the crotch, proffering submission in full court to law, in an understanding of it in force at the decisive moment, waxing toward the end of their long sentence philosophical, general notions of general notions, the medium as metaphysic, legacies as possible and or potential means of getting maybe at least something over that might be of some general use up against the wall. How many coming to accept existence as the first miracle, communication as the second, the body longing to be loved, the lovelorn longing to be embodied, that outside the solitary act of unself-conscious self-absorption, relationship, the moving point where two come together, where paths cross, is as close as we get to what they call transcendence. That having the one you love so close is about all anyone can stand or hope to understand. That neither sex nor eros is the great wall, the politic of separation, belligerence, and war. How many, in so long, the light alternating with shadows on their faces, recalling curtains partly drawn against the sun, spectacles before their eyes luminous with reflection, have become reluctant to scorn any victim, no longer assuming that since people get what they deserve, incompetence might account for poverty as well as moral inadequacy. Biting their tongues, wanting less to make a point than a difference, when confronted with ignorance and venality. Ready to give up the fiction that institutions, practices, mindsets are anything more substantial than historically determined vocabularies and grammars that lead us to think in terms of universal principles and divine truths. Encourage us to believe or hope that arguing over common sense, intuitively plausible platitudes or propositions, however logical they may be, will bring us one whit closer to knowing the nature of self and world and relations between them. In favor of seeing ourselves participant in community, engaged in civil conversation, a dialectic tension on how to increase individual freedom while lessening cruelty and pain. How many, seeing themselves as well as they can, recognizing that concepts, abstractions, myths, ideas, the mind, whatever we may have forgotten at birth, though they may make us sensitive to this or that irritation, have no life of their own, but only in living flesh as we persist, of this living world, its dancing with its ineffable self. How many trying to make that revolution real, to keep the natural world natural, personal, communal, the law of the commons, the common law, to stop the unnumbered world war, the war against our real estate, the mountains and coasts and watercourses, the fields, forests, plains, and flocks, eaten away by those with means to buy what can't be sold except by legal fictions, what can't be held except in common, in trust, in touch with more than just a passing sense of places our fortunes cross, but can be killed, the topsoil paved, the water poisoned, the past denied or dismembered, the present taken at face value, the generations yet to come deflowered by the invisible hand.